Thelvar's compound eyes scanned the emergency council chamber as dozens of alien representatives argued in panicked voices. The insectoid ambassador had witnessed many debates in his 3 centuries of service, but never had he seen such raw fear in the Galactic Council. The holographic display at the chamber's center showed the problem. 17 civilizations consumed, 300 worlds burning, and the Ravagers advancing without pause. The Phoenix ambassador, her fur standing on end, was practically screaming into her translator. "We must negotiate terms of surrender. Every species that has fought them has been erased from existence." Thelvar clicked his mandibles in agreement. Logic demanded survival. Pride was a luxury the living could not afford. The Torvali representative, a massive crystalline being, dimmed his internal light in a gesture of submission. Even the proud Melkari had sent word they would evacuate their border worlds. "The Ravagers do not negotiate," the council speaker announced, his voice heavy with defeat. "They consume. Our only option is retreat to the core systems and hope they stop advancing once they've taken the outer rim." Silence fell across the chamber. Everyone understood what that meant. 42 inhabited worlds would be abandoned. 12 billion souls left to their fate. "I request permission to speak." The voice was calm, almost unnaturally so given the circumstances. Thelvar turned his segmented head toward the human section. Captain Daewon Kim stood with perfect military posture, his dark eyes scanning the room with quiet confidence. The human wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decorations. Though Thelvar knew from reports that each small medal represented acts of exceptional courage. "The humans wish to speak?" The speaker sounded surprised. "Your species has been part of this council for only 2 centuries. You have no stake in these worlds. With respect, speaker, we have every stake." Daewon walked to the chamber floor, moving with the grace of a trained fighter. "We propose an alternative to surrender." Nervous clicking and whistling filled the room. The Phoenix ambassador's ears flattened. "Alternative? There is no alternative to overwhelming force. There is always an alternative." Daewon activated his own holographic display, showing a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Vermilion 7. It sits at the choke point between Ravager space and the core systems. If we fortify this world and hold the line, we give you time to evacuate civilians, regroup your fleets, and prepare actual defenses. Thelvar calculated the mathematics immediately. His species had evolved to process complex probability across multiple variables. The numbers were brutal. Captain Kim, the Ravager fleet approaching Vermilion 7, consists of 300 warships. According to our intelligence, you have 47 ships in that sector. The statistical probability of survival is not a factor in our decision, Daewon interrupted smoothly. Humanity will hold Vermilion 7. We will buy you time. That is not a request for permission, but a statement of intent. I am here as a courtesy, to coordinate evacuation efforts. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some species viewed the human offer with suspicion, others with pity. The Melkari representative spoke with its harmonic voice. "This is suicide. Why would you sacrifice your species for worlds not your own?" Daewon smiled, though Thelvar noticed it did not reach his eyes. "Because someone has to stand. Because if we don't draw the line here, where do we draw it? After the next 40 worlds fall? After 100? When the Ravagers reach Earth itself?" He paused, letting his words settle. "We stand now, so others don't have to stand alone later." The speaker studied the human for a long moment. "If you truly intend this action, we will coordinate evacuation procedures, but I will send an observer to document what occurs. Let the galaxy remember what humanity attempted, even if it ends in failure." "Send whoever you wish," Daewon replied. "We have nothing to hide." The speaker's gaze fell on Thelvar. "Ambassador, your species values historical accuracy above all else. You will observe and record, document humanity's last stand for the archives." Thelvar rose on his 6 legs, mandibles clicking in acknowledgement. Part of him resented the assignment. He was a diplomat, not a war correspondent. But duty was duty, and his people had served as the galaxy's memory keepers for millennia. 3 days later, Thelvar stood in the transport shuttle descending toward Vermilion 7. Through the viewport, he could see the beautiful world below, blue oceans and green continents unmarred by war. Yet, in orbit, human vessels moved in precise formations, constructing defense platforms and laying minefields. On the planet's surface, thermal readings showed massive construction efforts. The shuttle landed at the main human base, and Thelvar emerged into organized chaos. Soldiers ran between buildings, supply crates were being unloaded from freighters, and the sound of welding and construction echoed across the compound. He expected fear, desperation, the usual signs of people preparing to die. Instead, he heard laughter. A group of human soldiers sat outside a barracks, sharing food and making jokes. Their weapons were within arm's reach, their armor stacked neatly nearby. But they acted as if they were on leave, rather than awaiting annihilation. Ambassador Thelvar? A woman approached, her uniform marking her as a general. She was perhaps 50 standard years old, her black hair pulled back severely, her face carved with lines of command. "I'm General Haywan Park. Welcome to Vermilion 7. General." Thelvar clicked his mandibles in the human gesture of greeting he had learned. "I confess I do not understand what I am seeing." Your soldiers appear. Unconcerned, Haywan's lips quirked in something that might have been amusement. "They're terrified, Ambassador. But fear is not the same as defeat. We've been afraid before. We've faced impossible odds before. Fear just means we're paying attention." She led him through the base, pointing out defensive positions, weapon emplacements, and shield generators. Everything was being built with frantic efficiency. Yet there was no panic. Thelvar had studied enough military operations to recognize expertise when he saw it. "Your defensive strategy is sound," he admitted. "But the numbers remain unfavorable. Even with perfect execution, how can you hope to survive?" Haywan stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Her eyes held something Thelvar could not quite identify. Not madness, not even hope, really. Something harder, something that had been forged in fire and refused to break. "Ambassador, you're asking the wrong question. We don't measure survival in probability. We measure it in will. The question isn't whether we can survive. The question is whether we'll make the Ravagers regret ever coming here." Before Thelvar could respond, alarms began blaring across the base. A young officer ran up, saluting quickly. "General, long-range sensors have detected the Ravager fleet. They'll arrive in 72 hours. Haywan nodded calmly. "Sound General Quarters. Begin final preparations. And send word to Captain Kim in orbit. Tell him it's time." As the officer ran off, the general looked back at Thelvar. "You came to document our end, Ambassador. I hope you brought enough recording equipment, because what happens next is going to be worth remembering." Thelvar watched human soldiers moving to their positions with grim determination. For the first time in his long life, he wondered if his mathematical certainty about death and probability might be missing some essential variable, something that could not be calculated, something called the human spirit. The human base hummed with activity as Thelvar moved through the compound, recording everything. His multiple eyes captured details that would be analyzed later. Assuming he survived to deliver the recordings, the ambassador had expected to find a military camp gripped by despair, soldiers writing final messages to loved ones, commanders arguing over hopeless tactics. Instead, he found something that defied his understanding. In the central mess hall, 300 humans gathered for an evening meal. They sat in groups, talking and laughing. Someone had brought a guitar and was playing music. The smell of cooking food filled the air, and Thelvar watched as soldiers shared stories, clasped hands across tables, and smiled genuine smiles. Doesn't make sense, does it? A young man approached Thelvar, carrying a tray of food. He had lieutenant's insignia on his collar. "I'm Taemin Cho. General Park asked me to serve as your guide while you're here." "Lieutenant," Thelvar gestured toward the gathered soldiers. "I do not understand. They will be dead in less than 3 days. Why this? Celebration? Taemin sat down at a nearby table, motioning for Thelvar to join him. It's not a celebration, Ambassador. It's a reminder. We're reminding ourselves what we're fighting for. Connection, community, life itself. He took a bite of food before continuing. I used to be a teacher on a colony world. Taught children about Earth history, about art and music. When the war came, I enlisted because someone had to protect those children. But there are no children here to protect, Thelvar pointed out logically. There are billions being evacuated right now. Every hour we hold this world is another transport full of families reaching safety. Every day we buy is another world that can prepare defenses. Taemin's young face grew serious. My students are probably on one of those ships. That's worth dying for. A woman with sergeant's stripes approached their table. She was lean and muscular, with scars on her hands that spoke of hard fighting. Taemin, stop boring the ambassador with your philosophy. I'm Na Young Lee, weapons specialist. She sat down uninvited, setting what looked like an ancient sword on the table beside her meal. That's a family heirloom. My grandparents carried it during the resistance on Earth, back when our world was occupied. They taught me something important. What was that? Thelvar found himself genuinely curious despite his attempts to remain clinically detached. That standing ground for others is never a waste, even if you fall doing it. My grandparents fought against impossible odds. They lost. They died. But they bought time for others to organize, to fight back, to eventually win. We're doing the same thing, just on a bigger scale. Over the next 2 days, Thelvar followed the human preparations. He watched engineers modify shield generators using techniques that violated standard galactic safety protocols but somehow worked. A civilian scientist named Dr. Yuna Shin explained the modifications while working without sleep for 40 straight hours. The Ravagers use plasma-based weapons, she told him, her eyes red from exhaustion. We're adapting our shields to reflect that specific frequency. It won't last long, but it might give us a few precious minutes in combat. You could evacuate, Thelvar observed. Civilians are not required to stay. Yuna laughed, though there was no humor in it. Required? No. But necessary? Yes. These soldiers need every advantage I can give them. How could I leave? Knowing I could help. At the starport, Thelvar witnessed something that would stay in his memory forever. A young medic, Corporal Bo Young Han, was helping load alien refugees onto transport ships. A Quilarian child, the same species as Thelvar, clung to Bo Young's leg, refusing to board. I'm scared, the child chittered, in basic galactic common. Bo Young knelt down to the child's level. I know. But these nice people will take you somewhere safe. And we're going to make sure the bad things can't follow you. That's a promise. Sakes fees. Thank you for watching. End quote. Thank you for watching. 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 Will you come too? The child asked. No, little one. I have to stay and help people who get hurt, but you're going to be fine. And someday, when you're older, maybe you'll remember that a human friend promised to keep you safe. And we always keep our promises. The child finally boarded, looking back one last time. Bo Young waved until the ship lifted off. Thelvar approached her. That was kind. Unnecessary. But kind. It wasn't unnecessary. Bo Young replied firmly. That child needed hope. We all do. On the final night before the Ravagers arrived, General Haewon Park called all personnel to the command center for a briefing. Thousands of humans gathered, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing enemy fleet positions. Tomorrow, they come, Haewon said without preamble. 300 ships against our 47. By every logical calculation, we should lose. By every reasonable assessment, we should retreat. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. But humanity has never been particularly logical or reasonable. We're stubborn. We're difficult. And we absolutely refuse to accept that the universe gets to decide who lives and who dies, based purely on numbers. Cheers erupted from the gathered soldiers. Haywan waited for silence before continuing. You all volunteered for this. Every single person here chose to stand. Not because you were ordered. Not because you had no choice. You chose it, and that choice matters. It matters because the galaxy will see what happens when humans decide something is worth fighting for. Captain Daewon Kim appeared on the holographic display, transmitting from the flagship in orbit. Ground forces. This is orbital command. We're tracking the last civilian transports leaving the system. 15 ships, approximately 8,000 souls from 6 different species. They're heading to safety because you chose to stand. Never forget that. Thelvar recorded it all, his translator capturing the raw emotion in human voices. These beings knew they were going to die. They understood the mathematics as well as he did. And yet they stood firm, drew strength from each other, and prepared to face annihilation with their eyes open. After the briefing, Thelvar found himself alone with General Park in her command office. General, I must ask, why do this? Your species could have evacuated with the others. You have colony worlds far from here that would be safe. Haywan poured 2 glasses of water, offering one to Thelvar. Ambassador, let me tell you about humanity. We're not the strongest species. We're not the smartest. We don't have the best weapons or the fastest ships. You want to know our advantage? She smiled sadly. We remember. We remember every single time someone stood alone against darkness, every time someone sacrificed for others, every time courage mattered more than odds. Those memories are written into our DNA. She walked to the window, looking out at the base where her soldiers prepared for battle. We stand here because if we don't, we become something less than human. We become calculators of probability, traders of lives, beings who let others die because it's logical. And that's not who we are. That's not who we'll ever be. Thelvar absorbed her words, struggling to reconcile them with his species' philosophy of logical survival. Your name, he said finally. Humanity. It resonates across the stars even though you're newcomers. I'm beginning to understand why. You haven't seen anything yet, Haywan replied. Tomorrow, when those ships arrive, you'll understand fully. We don't just die well, Ambassador. We live well, right up until the last moment. Every second we breathe, we fight. Every heartbeat is defiance. And when we fall forward, toward the enemy, never in retreat. The alarm klaxons shattered the night. A young officer burst into the room. General, long-range sensors show the Ravager fleet has arrived ahead of schedule. They're beginning their approach. Contact in 6 hours. Haywan set down her water glass calmly. Sound battle stations. Wake everyone. I want all defensive positions manned in 30 minutes. She looked at Thelvar. Ambassador, I recommend you move to the secure bunker. This is going to get violent. No. Thelvar surprised himself by saying, I will observe from the command center. If I am to document this, I must witness it fully. The general smiled approvingly. Then, welcome to the fight, Ambassador. Try to keep up. As Thelvar followed Haywan to the command center, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his logical mind. These humans, with their impossible optimism and stubborn courage, were changing him. He had come to document their failure. Now he found himself hoping, against all probability and logic, that they might somehow succeed. The Ravagers were coming, and humanity was ready. The Ravager fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel like a plague of locusts descending on a harvest. Thelvar watched the tactical display in the command center as 300 hostile signatures appeared on sensors, blotting out the stars. Each ship was massive, scarred from countless battles, bristling with weapons that had destroyed civilizations. Against them, 47 human vessels held formation. The mathematics was obscene. Thelvar's brain automatically calculated survival probability. 0.0003%. Effectively zero. All ships. This is Captain Kim. Day One's voice crackled over the communication system, calm as if discussing dinner plans. Battle Formation Theta. We're not here to run. We're here to make them bleed for every meter. General Haywan Park stood at the center of the command center, hands clasped behind her back, face carved from stone. Around her, dozens of human officers monitored screens, coordinated defenses, and prepared for what should be a slaughter. Ravagers are launching fighters, an officer reported. Estimate 3,000 small craft inbound. Launch ours, Haywan ordered. All batteries prepare to fire on my mark. Ground forces, stand ready. This is it. Thelvar gripped the edge of a console as the battle began. Human fighters accelerated toward the massive Ravager force like arrows shot at a mountain. The first exchanges of fire lit up space with deadly colors. Human pilots flew with reckless precision, weaving between enemy fire, targeting weapon systems and engines with surgical strikes. Then the Ravagers returned fire, and the universe became chaos. Explosions blossomed across the tactical display. 3 human fighters gone in an instant. 5 more. 7. Thelvar watched the numbers dropping and felt something unfamiliar in his thorax. Something his species rarely experienced. Grief, but the humans kept fighting. One pilot, her ship crippled and burning, aimed directly at a Ravager cruiser and accelerated. For Earth, she screamed over the radio before her ship exploded against the enemy's bridge, leaving the massive vessel dead in space. Did she just... Thelvar couldn't finish the sentence. Ramming speed, Lieutenant Taymin said quietly beside him. He was coordinating ground forces, but his eyes were fixed on the orbital battle. When we can't win, we make sure they can't either. Captain Daywan's fighter squadron pushed deep into enemy formation, dodging fire that should have been impossible to avoid. Mark target Alpha 7, his voice came through strained but steady. That's their command carrier. If we take it out, we disrupt their coordination. Day 1, that's suicide, another pilot warned. Everything about this is suicide, Day 1 replied. Might as well make it count. All fighters, on me. We're going to hurt them. 12 human fighters dove toward the Ravager command ship. 8 were destroyed by defensive fire. 3 more fell to enemy interceptors. Only Day 1's ship survived, damaged and trailing atmosphere, but he reached his target. His missiles struck the command carrier's communication array, and across the tactical display, Ravager fleet coordination faltered. Got you, Day 1 gasped, fighting his dying ship back toward friendly lines. That's for the civilizations you murdered. On the ground, Sergeant Na Young Lee commanded an artillery battery on the northern perimeter. Ravager dropships began descending through the atmosphere, carrying troops to take the surface. Her targeting computer identified hundreds of landing craft. We can't hit them all, one of her gunners said, voice tight with fear. Then we hit as many as we can. Na Young responded. Target priority. Any ship heading toward civilian evacuation sites. Fire at will. Na. Any ships Na Yun. Na Young. Na Young. Na Young. Na Young. Na Young. Na Young. Na Young, the artillery sang, sending shells screaming into the sky. Ravager ships exploded, raining debris across empty plains. But for every ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. The enemy was learning, adapting, overwhelming through sheer numbers. Sergeant Lee, Ravager ground forces have breached perimeter 7. Taymin's voice came through her communication device. They're moving toward the starport. There's 1 transport left, delayed by engine trouble. 300 aliens still on board. Na Young checked her tactical map. The enemy was coming from the east in overwhelming force. If she repositioned to help the starport, she'd leave her current position undefended. If she stayed, those civilians would die. She made her choice in less than a second. All units. Reposition to starport defense. We're moving out. That'll leave our flank exposed, her second-in-command protested. I know. Do it anyway. They reached the starport as Ravager ground troops were advancing on the stranded transport. Alien families huddled inside, watching through viewports as death approached. Na Young positioned her artillery and opened fire at point-blank range. The Ravagers were caught off guard by the suicidal defense. Human shells tore through their ranks, buying precious seconds. The transport's engines roared to life, the ship lifting off just as enemy fire bracketed its position. "Go!" Na Young screamed at the departing ship. "Get them out!" But now the Ravagers focused on her position. Enemy troops surrounded the artillery battery. Na Young grabbed her family's sword from where it rested by her command chair, ancient steel that had defended Earth generations ago. "All guns, fire on my position," she ordered calmly into her communicator. "Danger close. Authorization Lee 77. "Sergeant, that'll kill you too," the fire control officer replied, horrified. "I know. Do it. That's an order." She drew the sword and stood to face the advancing enemy. "Not one more step. Not while I breathe." The artillery shells fell like rain, consuming everything in cleansing fire. Ravager troops, human defenders, and one sergeant who refused to yield. When the smoke cleared, the starport was secure. The transport had escaped, and Na Young Lee's sacrifice was transmitted across every human channel. At the command center, Thelvar watched the casualty reports mounting. 60% of human forces destroyed or disabled. The Ravagers were pressing their advantage, pouring through the breaches. This was the end. Logic demanded retreat. "General, we need to evacuate the command center," an officer urged. "Ravager ground troops are 3 kilometers away." HFY didn't move. "We hold. Where's Captain Kim?" "Returning to orbit," another officer reported. "His ship is barely holding together, but he's still flying." Daewon's voice came through, weak but defiant. "Command, this is Kim. I've got captured Ravager intelligence from their command carrier. Downloading now. Their fleet formation has a weakness at Sector 4 to 9. If we can hit it with enough force, we might disrupt their advance." "Captain, you need medical attention," HFY said. "I need to keep fighting," Daewon replied. "Reforming fighter wings for another strike. Anyone who can still fly, form up on me." 17 fighters remained operational. They formed up and dove back into the fight. Corporal Bo Young Han's field hospital was overwhelmed with wounded. Humans and aliens both. Bleeding and broken. She moved between them with practiced efficiency, saving who she could, comforting who she couldn't. A Phoenix soldier grabbed her arm. "Leave me. Save someone who has a chance." Bo Young looked down at the alien with fierce determination. "Everyone has a chance while I'm breathing. Now hold still." 12 hours of continuous combat. The Ravagers had expected to overwhelm human defenses in minutes. Instead, they faced defenders who refused to break, who fought for every meter, who turned their own dying bodies into weapons when nothing else remained. As the first wave of Ravagers finally pulled back to regroup, Thelvar looked at the damage reports. The numbers were catastrophic. But the humans were still fighting. Still breathing. Still defiant. General Park's voice echoed through the command center, strong despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "All units, status report. If you can still fight, sound off." Across the communication channels, voices replied. Damaged. Wounded. Reduced to a fraction of their strength. But still alive. Still ready. Taemin's transmission came through from a forward bunker. "This is Lieutenant Cho. We're still here. Not one step back. Not one civilian lost. That's the promise." Those words spread through the human lines like fire, becoming a rallying cry. Not one step back. Not one civilian lost. Thelvar's recorder captured everything. The impossible stand. The willing sacrifice. The courage that defied mathematical certainty. He had come to document failure. Instead, he was witnessing something the galaxy had never seen. Humanity's true nature revealed in fire and blood. And it was glorious. Day 3 of the siege, and Thelvar transmitted his reports to the Galactic Council with trembling mandibles. The humans should have fallen by now. Every calculation, every probability model, every piece of logic in his brain said they should be dead. But they weren't. The Ravagers sent their second wave, 200 fresh ships against humanity's remaining 28 damaged vessels. Captain Dae-won Kim, now commanding from a cruiser after his fighter was destroyed, coordinated the defense with the precision of a surgeon cutting out disease. "They expect us to defend," he told his fleet, "so we attack. All ships, emergency thrust." Full speed into their formation. The Ravagers recoiled in confusion as human ships charged directly at them, firing at point-blank range, using destroyed vessels as shields, ramming when weapons failed. It was madness. It was beautiful. It worked. Across the galaxy, other species watched the broadcasts from Vermilion 7 with growing disbelief. The Phoenix High Command analyzed the battle footage. The Torvali Senate held emergency sessions. The Melkari Collective reconsidered their retreat. How were these humans surviving? Day 6. Half of humanity's original force was gone. Those who remained fought with injuries that should have killed them. Dr. Yuna Shin worked around the clock in the engineering bay, creating weapons from salvaged Ravager technology. She had gone 72 hours without sleep, her hands shaking as she connected alien power cells to human targeting systems. "This should explode," she muttered to herself. 90% chance of catastrophic failure. Lieutenant Tae-min, passing through the engineering section on an inspection, paused. "But 10% chance it works?" Yuna grinned tiredly. "Exactly. And 10% is better odds than we've had all week." The weapon worked. It turned Ravager shields against them for precious seconds, long enough for human artillery to tear through enemy positions. Yuna collapsed from exhaustion immediately after, but her innovation saved hundreds of lives. On the surface, Corporal Bo Young-han had turned an underground bunker into a field hospital. Wounded poured in, both human and alien. She had lost count of the surgeries, the lives saved by centimeters, the deaths she couldn't prevent. A young human soldier, barely 19 years old, was brought in with catastrophic injuries. "What's your name?" Bo Young asked gently, working to stabilize him. "Sang-woo, Private Sang-woo Jun," the boy gasped. "My squad, they're all dead. I'm the only one left." "Then you carry their memory," Bo Young told him firmly. "You survive. And you make sure what they did mattered." "Can you do that?" Sang-woo nodded weakly. Against impossible odds, Bo Young saved his life. 3 days later, Sang-woo was back on the front lines, fighting with the determination of someone carrying the weight of fallen comrades. Day 8 brought a miracle. Long-range sensors detected ships approaching, but they weren't Ravagers. The Galactic Council chamber erupted in chaos as the Phoenix High Commander stood before the assembly. "We watched humans fight and die for strangers," she declared, her fur bristling with emotion. "We watched them hold when every rational being would flee. And we ran. We left them to die alone." Her voice dropped. "No more. The Phoenix fleet is returning to Vermilion 7. If humans can stand against darkness, so can we." The Torvali representative brightened his crystalline form. "Our forces join them as well. They've shown us what courage looks like. We won't forget again." Even the Melkari, who had fled furthest, turned their ships around. "Humanity taught us that survival without honor is not survival at all. We return to fight." Thelvar transmitted this news to General Park. For the first time since the siege began, he saw her smile. "Tell them to hurry. We're running out of soldiers to throw at these bastards." Among the incoming fleets was a human reinforcement force. Not military vessels, but civilian ships retrofitted with weapons. Volunteers from Earth and the colonies. They had heard about Vermilion 7 and rushed toward the battle, not away from it. Commander Ji Hae-yoon led the civilian fleet. She was Dae-won Kim's older sister, a transport captain who had armed her cargo ship with mining lasers and torpedo tubes. "Little brother," she transmitted to Dae-won, "you started this fight without inviting me. That's just rude." Dae-won laughed for the first time in 8 days. "Better late than never, Ji-hae. Welcome to the party." Dae-won laughed for the first time 7.rwar.com, but the Ravagers weren't finished. Day 9 brought their third major assault. They had learned from their previous failures, adapted their tactics, and brought overwhelming force. General Park watched from the command center as enemy ground troops surrounded the base. An explosion rocked the building. Shrapnel tore through the command center. Park fell, blood spreading across her uniform. Officers rushed to her side, but she pushed them away. Just a scratch. Get me to the medical bay, patch me up, and get me back here. We're not stopping now. General, you need surgery, an officer protested. What I need is to keep fighting. Bo Young will fix me up enough to keep going. That's good enough. They carried her to the underground hospital where Bo Young took one look at the wound and shook her head. General, you should be evacuated. This is serious. So is everything else. Do what you can, Corporal. Make me functional. Bo Young worked with desperate skill. She couldn't heal the wound completely, not with limited supplies and no time, but she could stabilize it, numb the pain, and give Park a few more hours of combat effectiveness. It was a terrible medical decision. It was exactly what the general needed. Park returned to command within 2 hours, pale and moving stiffly but standing. Her soldiers saw her return and fought harder, inspired by her refusal to yield. Day 10. Lieutenant Taemin held the eastern perimeter with a mixed force of 30 humans and alien volunteers who had refused evacuation. Ravager troops attacked in waves. Taemin coordinated fire, directed reinforcements, and fought personally when the enemy breached their positions. A Quilarian soldier beside him fell, wounded. Taemin dragged the insectoid warrior to cover while firing with his free hand. Stay down. Help is coming. Why do you fight for us? The Quilarian asked, confused. We are not your species. Taemin reloaded his weapon with practiced ease. Because when I taught children on my colony, some of them were Quilarian, some were Phoenix, some were human. They all deserved a future. That's worth dying for. He transmitted his now famous message across all channels. Not one step back, not one civilian lost. Hold the line. Those words had become humanity's anthem. Soldiers repeated them in the heat of battle. Dying warriors whispered them as their last words. The galaxy heard them and understood what they meant. Humanity would stand until the last breath. For people they had never met. For principles that transcended survival. Day 11. Thelvar had stopped filing objective reports. His transmissions to the Council were now filled with raw emotion his species rarely expressed. He watched Private Sang-woo, the 19-year-old boy who had lost his entire squad, hold a bunker single-handedly for 6 hours. He watched Dr. Yuna work until her hands bled, creating innovations that gave humanity fractional advantages. He watched Corporal Bo Young save lives while the building collapsed around her. Never stopping, never yielding. And he watched as the Allied fleets began arriving. Phoenix, Torvali, Melkari, and dozens of human civilian ships, dropping out of faster-than-light travel. The Ravagers suddenly faced something they had never encountered. United resistance. Commander Ji-hee coordinated the combined fleet with her brother Day 1. All ships. This is the Yun siblings. We're about to show these Ravagers why you don't mess with humanity or our friends. Phoenix Wing, take the left flank. Torvali, center formation. Melkari, you're with me on the right. Human ships, we're going straight down the middle. The galaxy's defenders attacked as one. The Ravagers, expecting the same scattered resistance they had faced for 11 days, were unprepared for coordinated assault. Ships that had consumed civilizations fell before the combined fury of species who had learned courage from humanity. On the ground, General Park issued her final orders before the decisive battle. All personnel. This is it. The Ravagers are preparing their biggest assault yet. They're going to throw everything at us. But look around you. We're not alone anymore. We stood when no one else would. Now they stand with us. She paused, her voice carrying across every communication channel on the planet. When this is done, when the histories are written, they'll ask why we held. Tell them we held because someone has to. Tell them we held because every life mattered. Tell them we held because that's what humans do. Thelvar stood beside her, no longer a detached observer. His recorder was still running. But now he fought alongside the humans, using a weapon that felt awkward in his manipulator appendages. He had come to document their end. Instead, he became part of their stand. The final assault was coming. The Ravager superfleet emerged from the darkness like a cosmic nightmare. Sensors across Vermilion 7 screamed warnings as 1,000 warships appeared in formation, blotting out entire constellations. It was the largest force the Ravagers had ever assembled, brought together to crush the resistance that had humiliated them for 11 days. In the command center, now half destroyed and running on emergency power, General Haywon Park studied the tactical display without flinching. Around her, the combined forces of a dozen species waited for orders. Human, Phoenix, Torvali, Melkari, and more. Even Thelvar stood ready, his recorder still running but his hands holding a weapon. "They're here to make an example of us," Haywon said quietly. "Show the galaxy what happens when you resist. Show everyone that defiance means death." Captain Daewon Kim's face appeared on the communication screen, broadcasting from the Allied fleet in orbit. His ship was barely functional, held together by emergency welds and stubborn human engineering. "General, we're outnumbered 10 to 1. Orders?" Haywon smiled, though blood stained her uniform from wounds that had never properly healed. "We show them they're wrong. All forces, prepare for final engagement. And someone get me Dr. Shin." A young officer looked up sadly. "General, Dr. Yuna Shin is in the engineering corps. She says she's not coming out. She's working on something." In the depths of the base, Yuna had been awake for nearly 70 hours, running on stimulants and pure determination. Before her was a device built from salvaged Ravager technology, human ingenuity, and what the other engineers had called absolutely insane theoretical physics. "Doctor, the general wants you evacuated," an assistant said. "Tell the general I'm exactly where I need to be," Yuna replied, her hands moving across controls with manic precision. "I've created a cascading energy pulse. If I can get it close enough to their superfleet, it'll disable their shields for approximately 90 seconds. How do you deliver it?" Yuna laughed, exhausted and slightly mad. "I drive it there myself. This whole section of the base is now a bomb. I just need to make sure it reaches the right place." The assistant went pale. "That's suicide. Everything about this fight has been suicide. At least this way, I make it count." The final battle began with an exchange of fire that made previous engagements look like minor skirmishes. The Ravager superfleet unleashed destruction that had consumed civilizations. Human and allied ships fought back with everything they had. Space itself seemed to burn. Commander Ji Hae-yun led the civilian fleet in a desperate charge. Mining vessels and cargo haulers, armed with improvised weapons, flew alongside military cruisers. "For every world they've destroyed," she screamed into the communication channel. "For every species they've erased. Make them pay for it all." On the ground, Lieutenant Tae-min coordinated the defense of the last remaining strongholds. Enemy troops poured from landing craft by the thousands. His forces were exhausted, wounded, running out of ammunition. But they held, because that's what humans did. "Not one step back," he whispered, firing his weapon until it overheated. "Not one civilian lost." Corporal Bo Young's hospital was directly in the path of the Ravager advance. Wounded soldiers, both human and alien, filled every available space. She could have evacuated, left them to their fate. Instead, she stood in the entrance with a rifle. "You want them?" she shouted at the approaching enemy forces. "You go through me first." Private Sang-woo and a handful of survivors joined her, creating a defensive line with their own bodies. The 19-year-old who had lost his entire squad now protected hundreds of wounded, buying seconds that became minutes, minutes that became hope. In orbit, the battle raged with apocalyptic fury. Captain Daewon flew his dying ship through enemy formations, targeting critical systems, creating chaos in the Ravager ranks. His sister Ji-hae fought beside him, the two siblings coordinating attacks with the intuition of shared blood. "Daewon," Ji-hae transmitted, "I'm proud to die fighting alongside you." "We're not dead yet," her brother replied. "And I'm not giving these bastards the satisfaction." Dr. Yuna activated her device. The entire engineering section of the base transformed into a massive energy weapon. She programmed the final coordinates, aimed at the heart of the Ravager superfleet, and whispered a quiet goodbye to a universe she'd never see again. For humanity. For all of us. The explosion was visible from orbit. A pillar of light that rose from Vermilion 7's surface and struck the Ravager fleet like the fist of an angry god. The cascading energy pulse spread through their formation, disabling shields across hundreds of ships simultaneously. "Now!" General Park screamed. "All forces! Fire everything!" The Allied fleet didn't need to be told twice. Every ship, every weapon, every desperate improvisation, humanity and their allies had created unleashed simultaneously. Ravager vessels, their shields down, died by the dozens. The superfleet that had seemed unstoppable seconds ago was suddenly vulnerable, but the cost was terrible. Human ships rammed enemy cruisers when their weapons failed. Pilots ejected precious seconds before impact, watching their vessels become missiles. Jihei's civilian hauler took a direct hit, exploding in a bloom of fire. Day One screamed his sister's name, but there was no response. On the ground, Taemin's position was finally overrun. He fought with empty weapons, then with his bare hands, giving the wounded more seconds to evacuate. A Ravager warrior struck him down. But not before he transmitted his final message. "We held. Tell everyone. We held." The Ravagers were breaking. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they faced an enemy that refused to accept defeat. Every destroyed human ship took Ravager vessels with it. Every fallen soldier bought time for others. The mathematics of attrition had reversed. They were losing. The Ravager command made a decision that shocked the galaxy. They retreated. The superfleet, damaged and demoralized, turned and fled into faster-than-light travel. They had come to make an example. Instead, they became one. Silence fell across Vermilion 7. Smoke rose from 1,000 fires. The base was ruins. The orbital fleet was shattered. But the Ravagers were gone. Defeated by courage they couldn't comprehend, General Haewon Park collapsed in her command chair, finally allowing her wounds to claim consciousness. Corporal Bo Young rushed to save her, just as she'd saved so many others. Private Sangwoo stood among the ruins, alive, carrying the memory of fallen comrades. Captain Day One searched desperately for his sister. Finding her escape pod damaged but intact, Jihei unconscious but breathing, Thelvar stood in the center of the destroyed base, his recorder capturing everything. 80% of the human force was dead or wounded. The victory had cost nearly everything. But it was a victory. Against impossible odds, humanity and their allies had stood. And the Ravagers had run. 3 months later, Thelvar stood before the Galactic Council. The chamber was silent as he presented his findings, his voice carrying emotion. His species rarely showed. "I was sent to document humanity's failure," he began, "to record their destruction as a warning to others. Instead, I witnessed something the galaxy had forgotten. I witnessed courage." He activated his recordings, showing the Council everything. The laughter in the mess hall before battle. Na Young's sacrifice for strangers. Day One's impossible flight. Yuna's final gift. Taemin's last stand. Bo Young's refusal to abandon the wounded. Sangwoo's survival against all odds. Humanity doesn't resonate across the stars because of superior technology. They're not the strongest or the smartest. They resonate because when darkness came, when logic demanded surrender, when every calculation showed defeat was certain, they stood anyway. The council members sat in stunned silence. Even the most logical among them felt something shift in their understanding. They didn't stand because they thought they could win. They stood because someone had to. They died so others might live. They fought so others might hope. And in doing so, they taught the galaxy something we'd forgotten. That survival isn't just about living. It's about what you're willing to die for. End quote. Thelvar paused, his mandibles clicking softly. "I am Quilarian. We value logic above all else. But I learned on Vermilion 7 that there are things more important than logic. Honor, sacrifice, the simple, stubborn refusal to let darkness win without a fight. The memorial was built where the human base had stood. Enormous walls of black stone held millions of names, humans who fell, aliens they saved, species that learned courage by watching them stand. General Haywan Park attended the dedication. Walking with a cane but standing straight, Corporal Bo Young had saved her life, just as she'd saved so many others. Captain Day One and Commander Ji Hay stood together, siblings who had fought side by side. They read names of friends, comrades, heroes who had made victory possible. Young Private Sang Woo, now promoted, placed flowers at the memorial, honoring the squad he'd lost and the cause they'd died defending. Across the galaxy, things changed. Species that had retreated returned to defend their borders. The Ravagers, shocked by their first defeat, never recovered their momentum. Within a year, they were driven back. Within 5, they were gone. But the real legacy wasn't military victory. It was the lesson humanity taught, that courage matters, that standing for others is never wasted, that even when defeat seems certain, defiance has value. Thelvar remained on Vermilion 7, choosing to serve as the memorial's keeper. Visitors came from across the galaxy, wanting to understand what happened. He told them the same thing every time. Humanity's name resonates not because they won. It resonates because they stood. When every calculation said flee, when every instinct said survive, they chose to matter instead. They chose to be remembered not for how they lived, but for what they lived for. Children from a dozen species played near the memorial, their laughter echoing across the rebuilt world. Human, Phoenix, Quilarian, Torvali. All together, they were alive because humans had decided their lives were worth dying for. Thelvar watched them play and understood finally what General Park had meant. Humanity didn't measure survival in probability. They measured it in will, in the choice to stand when standing seemed impossible, in the refusal to let darkness claim victory without cost. As the sun set over Vermilion 7, casting long shadows across the memorial stones, Thelvar made his final entry into the historical record. I came to document their end. Instead, I witnessed their meaning. Humanity showed us that names resonate across stars, not through conquest or domination, but through light brought to darkness, through courage given freely, through lives spent so others might flourish. He paused, looking at the names carved in stone. Millions of them. Each one a story. Each one a choice. They asked me once why I stayed. Why I didn't flee when I could have. I told them the truth. Because they taught me what it means to truly live, not just exist, not just survive, but to stand for something greater than yourself. That lesson was worth any risk. The memorial would stand for thousands of years. Future generations would visit and wonder at the species that refused to yield. They would read the names and learn what courage looked like. They would hear the stories and understand why. Across all the stars and civilizations of the galaxy, one word carried special weight: human. Not because they were perfect, not because they were invincible, but because when it mattered most, they stood. And in standing, they showed the universe what it truly means to be worthy of remembrance.